Welcome everyone. I am Shayla, as Katie has introduced me. Um, Wherever I go, where I come from, we begin by saying Sabona. And the Zulu people say Sawubona. It's the same thing. It all means I see you. And the seeing is that one beyond the physical capabilities of eyes. It's to say, I see you, I see your people, I see your spirit, I see the people who you walk alongside. That's where Ubuntu begins when we see each other. So I want to start there and say, I see you all, even though I am limited to the screens in front of me. I hear we have people all over the world. So welcome. And I would like to invite you to share how you greet in your language, because I think the English language is very impoverished. It can reduce very sacred greetings to just hi. So I took the time to explain the meaning behind the Ndebele and Zulu people, how we greet. So I'm curious to know how you greet in your language. There are so many people who go around, either they are code switching or they have learned that English is better or to assimilate into the dominant society. And usually assimilation is often a testimony of loss. Really, when you assimilate into the dominant culture, you melt into the melt. It's we call it the melting pot, right? You melt into the dominant pot, and by so doing, our languages are often hidden. So just to give people permission to show up in their native languages. So thank you for participating. And to amplify that, I'm going to play a video. I'm hoping and keeping my fingers crossed that it will play. And please give me feedback if it's not playing, but I'm hoping that it does.
Hello. I've just greeted you in multiple languages using my mbira, a traditional, spiritual African instrument that our ancestors used to communicate to the Creator through their ancestors. When the colonizers came, the mbira was deemed evil and banned. The voices of our ancestors were silenced. Today, we reclaim our beautiful, powerful voices. Today, we honor our ancestors, those that remained on the motherland and those that were ripped from the cradle of the motherland. Today, we acknowledge those on whose land here in Canada we reside. We are grateful that we were welcomed on this land. Mbira contributes to mental well-being. Mbira is soothing. Mbira is calming. Mbira is therapeutic. It's like water. It's like raindrops. These are some of the statements that I hear people say when I play Mbira. I hope you realize that leaning on your culture is a protective factor. I've leaned on my Mbira and it has healed me. It saved my life when I was about to die by suicide. I was acutely depressed and could not find any way out. It is my Mbira, my identity that grounded me. Today, I hope you find ways of grounding yourself. Your mental well-being is important. I help people become mentally fit. Mother, grandmother, sister, niece, auntie, friend. I am Madube. That's my totem, Manjenjenje, the zebra. I hope that you have a beautiful, powerful day of learning and that everything you learned from this workshop can have a lasting impact in your life. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Kuya nami. Ndinotenda. Yabo.
All right, people, thank you. Thank you for listening to Mama Francesca Mandea. She lives in Nunavut. And I asked her to do that video for me so that when I show up in these workshops, I can greet you all in various languages. So I know you didn't listen to all of it because of technical challenges, but all she did was just greet in various languages from Africa to Asia to North America. That's all she did, and I appreciated that. So hopefully you tapped in a little bit, and she shared that she's found the instrument that she's using as a grounding activity for her. So who am I? First of all, I just want to, I have learned from a lady called Crystal Asige. She is a visually impaired woman who's a senator from Kenya. She gives visual descriptions of herself before she speaks. And I've learned that as it is really in the spirit of Ubuntu that whenever we show up, we want to include everyone. So for that reason, and also as a reminder that all of us are temporarily able-bodied, and that may change anytime. I'm just gonna give a quick description that I am a melanated person of African descent with brown skin that is racialized as Black. I have blonde hair by choice. It's curly and pushed back, and I'm wearing wooden earrings that are carved the words Africa Queen, not African. They say Africa, and they have a little bit of gold. And I'm wearing an African print dress. It also has royal blue colors from Amazon. I have plants around me as well, and there's a big world picture that was created. The artist is here in Vegreville. Her name is Ingrid. So I just want to give that visual description and share that my pronouns are she and her, and I also use we and us, which is on my um, next to my name here on Zoom. And that is really just a reminder that I'm not self-made. I am community made, I'm creator anchored, and I'm ancestor validated. We do live in an individualistic society where there's a lot of me, myself, and I. So I use those pronouns to ground myself and remind me of who I am. And when I say I'm an extension of you, that is really what Ubuntu is about. It teaches us that we are an extension of each other. Um, I speak Isindebele as I started by greeting you with Savona and also shared that it overlaps with isiZulu. It's all part of the Nguni Southern African people. Most Ndebeles, all Ndebeles have history in South Africa because they migrated from South Africa. So when you see isiZulu and Ndebele overlapping, that's what that's about. I cannot show up in any space without acknowledging my grandparents who took me in when I was 6 months old. So I am because they are. You may be familiar with that statement. Whenever people talk about Ubuntu, that is what I like to say, the colonial appropriated version of Ubuntu. Everybody says I am because you are. But in a world where that is individualistic, I think it can lose its meaning because when we say I am because you are, we got to think of who is the you part that's in there. Um, I'm also a mother, which I should have started with because I think it's the title that I wear with the most pride. Um, I'm a child and youth mental health specialist. I've spent for 12 years working with children, youth, and their families. I started in child protection, and then I went to mental health, where I have been for the past 12 years. I teach at the University of Calgary part-time, and I'm also a mental health therapist, although I'm now pivoting from individual work to collective work. So from individual therapy to group therapy, and because healing we heal in community. So just really just trying to combat the locating problems within individuals. And I like to really balance what I am with what I do with who I am. And so I extend that invitation for you to reflect on who are you beyond what you do. Because most of us, we are so quick to talk about, I'm a social worker, I have a PhD in this. But when we ask you, who are you? We often stumble and mumble there. So that's the invitation that I'm extending to everyone here to think about who you are. Um, in places that are anti-oppressive and equity responsive, we have to start with learning agreements and rights and all of that. So, during our time together, I invite you to participate as you please. Your presence is enough, so you can participate if you feel comfortable, but you can also pass. I also invite you to share the knowledge. However, protect people's names. So if there are any stories shared, that we respect the confidentiality piece. Um, Non-judgment goes without saying, because where Ubuntu is involved, there is really no judgment. We listen with curiosity. We don't listen to critique or criticize. And I welcome all emotions, pleasant and unpleasant. And if you notice, I didn't say negative emotions, because emotions are just emotions. So pleasant and unpleasant, and the pleasantness and unpleasantness really is defined by how it lands in your nervous system. And if there's any signs of discomfort, I just ask that you lean into your nervous system again, being curious about where that's coming from, and try to care for yourself in ways that you need. And then finally, I hope that we can have some joy and fun together. And I know that's really defined individually. So laughter and connection are really part of healing. And before I proceed, I have a question about what is it that you need for this hour together to be safe? Because everybody defines what safety is. I wish I could say this is a safe space, which is very common in many spaces, but unfortunately, I do not know what makes each and every one of you safe. So I can only hope that we can co-create it together and make it safe, whatever that means to each and every one of you. What do you need to make this a safe space? And you don't have to write it out loud, but it's an invitation for you to reflect on that. All right, my hopes and intentions are that by the end of this workshop, you can learn some core principles of Ubuntu, not just in youth work, but in your coexistence with other human beings. I will touch a little bit on ACEs, which is the adverse childhood experiences, and contrast them with Resmaa Menakem's heap theory. I also hope that you will gain some tools to build trauma responsive and culturally safer places for youth and other people that you work with. And we'll also reflect on building villages of care versus cages of competition. And all of that is to contribute towards cultural humility, which is really a cultural competency tool. Before we go into what Ubuntu is, I want to talk a little bit about cultural competency and cultural humility, because it is really the ground of this work. It's the foundation of why we have to reclaim Ubuntu to begin with. I'm curious what people think about what culture is, but all these questions are just for your reflection. But I want to begin by acknowledging that we all have culture. I've had one of my students share that she was presenting and she said, people of culture. And I listened and I listened, and she kept repeating people of culture, people of culture. And I got confused. I'm like, what do you mean, people of culture? And so I had to interrupt her, and I asked her, just to make sure everyone who's in this class is following, can you tell us, who do you mean when you say, who are you referring to when you say people of culture? And it turns out that she was replacing people of color with people of culture, because I had criticized people of color before. So I guess sometimes as students, we try to appease our instructors. So that was her way of trying to appease me. But she said people of culture, which meant that as a person of European descent or European ancestry, she did not believe that she has culture herself. So I want to challenge that and say everybody has culture. And so when you are a youth worker or a social worker or whatever role you have, we have to understand the role of culture in human behavior. And I have the privilege of being mentored by Dr. Terry Cross, who is the indigenous scholar who coined cultural competence back in the 1980s. And he says culture is the way in which people's needs, people meet their needs. And I love that definition of culture. And Dr. Wade Noble says culture is to people as water is to fish. So if everybody has a culture and we do not prioritize culture in how we show up, and it boils down to we cannot be effective in the work that we are doing if we do not understand people's worldviews. And Dr. Terry Cross, when he developed cultural competency, he developed it as a continuum with various stages. It was never meant to be aesthetic or aesthetic destination of expertise. It's a continuum with different stages. And for you to be able to know which stage you are at in the continuum requires some humility because you cannot know whether you're proficient or you need some learning unless you have some humility to be ongoingly reflecting on where you are in the learning process. So in my brackets there, I do have the continuum stages. Cultural destructiveness or cultural destruction is the first stage of the cultural competency. And we know that whenever colonialism is, there's a lot of destruction from displacement to people's languages being destroyed, culture and traditions and all of that. So it begins with cultural destruction. And he says that whenever there's a destruction of culture, there's often incapacity, meaning we are incapacitated. We do not have the resources to respond to the destruction. So cultural incapacity is one of the continuum stages of cultural competency. And then cultural blindness, which is sometimes referred to as institutional assimilation, where we expect the people that we are serving, otherwise known as clients, to fit into our programs and services without really considering their cultural nuances or their or their worldviews. Excuse my spelling there of pre-competence. I missed it. When we go to the pre-competence stage, that's when you begin to think about how culture and spirituality are important and how you could consider um, bridging that into how you work with people. And in the cultural competence stage, we are now actively weaving culture in, or whether you're learning more about the person's culture and the worldview, and also changing the context in which you're working to meet the people's worldviews. And then in the proficiency stage, I think that's really the ongoing learning that happens. So it's not really, so you're constantly going back and forth to check where you are in the continuum. When we're done, I do have the article that from Dr. Terry Cross that explains these continuum stages in comprehensive ways. Today, I'm just really doing a quick review, a brief review. And then he also talks about 5 steps of becoming culturally competent. The first one being understanding and accepting cultural differences, understanding and accepting difference. That every time people meet, even people that look like you understand that there are commonalities as much as there are differences. And the first
And
and and the second one is understanding your own culture. Understanding your own culture, which I think is the most important one, because when you do not understand your own culture, you're going to overlook the importance of culture in other people's life, as we can't really give what we don't have. So like my student who was saying people of culture, she didn't think she has a culture herself. So if you do not understand your own culture, you're very likely to be perpetuating harm when you're working with people that have different cultural experiences and lived experiences from you. And the third step of becoming culturally competent is understanding the dynamics of difference. That's where intersectionality comes in. Let's say you're working with a family from that operates under extended family, and you are in the Western society where um, family means nuclear family. So you get to now see this family through the lenses of their own culture. So the understanding the dynamics of difference. And then the fourth stage is now developing cultural knowledge. It's not possible to learn everything about any culture, even your own. We are constantly learning. That's why it's a continuum, but that's where you begin to develop knowledge, and you're actively um, putting yourself in a position of being a learner and not an expert. So where you're constantly learning, you're learning from the people, but the best way to learn about other people's cultures is to witness them in community. Because if I come in as an individual, I may be code switching, like I said. I may have internalized um, single narrative, single stories, problem saturated stories about myself. But if you experience me with my community in a culture, that's where you're likely to learn more about my culture. And finally, we change the context in which we work to meet the cultural context of the people that we're serving. So those are the 5 steps. And once again, they're a continuum. They are not a static. It's not linear to say you need to be doing this or that. But these are really the guidance of cultural competency learnings that I've learned from Dr. Terry Cross, and you're welcome to Google him up and Google his articles. He's written a lot of peer-reviewed work. And now that we know a little bit about cultural competency and cultural humility, um, what 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 is Ubuntu and what does Ubuntu mean to you? Um, are there any people here that have heard the statement, I am because you are? Ubuntu is a Southern African philosophy, and it emphasizes our interconnectedness, collective responsibility, and shared humanity, and the importance of community in fostering well-being. So, I, when I came to Canada, I began also internalizing and amplifying that I am because you are. Until recently, I started questioning if it really captures the true essence of what Ubuntu is about. And I have come to the conclusion that I don't want to say it's the appropriated version, but I think it's a reduction of Ubuntu. It's a fragmented version of Ubuntu, because when we look at what Ubuntu is about, it's about the interconnectedness of all living beings. So that includes the humans and animals and nature. So I'm going to dive deeper here. Muntu means person, which is the singular for people. And then Bantu is the plural of Muntu, and that means people. And then we have Aba, which is an extraction from Baba, and that means a father or creator. And two from Bantu and Ubuntu represents the divine essence within us. And so when we talk about Abantu, when we say Abantu, we are referring to people whose lives are guided by Ubuntu. And Ubuntu not being a rule book, but more of a sacred law that is written and inscribed in their hearts. And Abantu practice what is called Isintu. And Isintu is really the ancestral knowledge rooted in connection, reciprocity, and collectivity. So therefore, Ubuntu is for all humanity. It's about restoring and reuniting Abantu across globe. Abantu being people, so all human beings. And it is from the Nguni languages of Isindebele, isiZulu, and isiXhosa, but it is practiced beyond Southern Africa. The Filipino people called it Kapwa. The Maori people have their own uh, names for the practice of collectivity, the practice of Ubuntu. And I recently learned a term from Indian people as well, but I forgot it. So what I've learned is that most non-Western people really do practice Ubuntu. They may call it something different, but the idea of interconnectedness, shared humanity, reciprocity, and living communally with each other, that's what Ubuntu really is. The core principles of Ubuntu, I've already touched on some of them: interconnectedness of all beings, compassion, shared humanity, cooperation, communal solidarity, and humility. Those are aspects of Ubuntu. And I'm going to share a video. I'm going to play a video by Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu is known as one of the fathers of Ubuntu, and I think I give him credit with Nelson Mandela for putting Ubuntu on the international platform. So please let me know if the audio is not good.
Let me tell you, we have something in our African community, something that is very difficult to put into English. It is called Ubuntu. Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the essence of being human. And it says a solitary human being is a contradiction in terms. I can't be a human being on my lonesome. I wouldn't know how to speak as a human being. I wouldn't know how to think as a human being. I wouldn't know how to talk as a human being. I have to learn from other human beings how to be human. And so Ubuntu says, my humanity is bound up in yours. I am only because you are. And we then see a person is a person through other persons. And that we need this communal harmony if we're going to survive at all. And anger and revenge and bitterness are corrosive of this harmony. And you know it. You've experienced how when you are really angry with someone, it does something to your tam-tam. And it does something to your blood pressure. So forgiving is actually not being altruistic. You're not being nice to the other guy. When you forgive, you're actually being nice to yourself. Forgiving, apart from anything else, is good for your health.
Now that I've taken the time to break down the linguistic aspects of Ubuntu and um, had Desmond Tutu describe it for you, I am curious to hear how what it means to you and your communal context. And again, these are questions that I'm posing for your own journaling as we proceed. Um, Desmond Tutu talked about what happens when we don't forgive and what happens when we are holding on to anger. And I want to mention that rage and anger are sacred, and oftentimes they are a reflection of our grief. Although we do have to teach youth, if you are working with youth, we want to teach them about our three storytellers, the mind and the heart and the body, because most of the times the body holds wisdom for what the mind sometimes cannot articulate, which is why you will have a child that was adopted at birth who still struggles with separation anxiety and things like that because the body remembers. So we want to make sure that we are equipping the people that we are working with an understanding of the interconnection between the mind and the heart and the body. Right now, there's a lot happening in the world, politically, um, from Gaza to the US to Congo and Sudan. And we are not immune to all of that, in addition to our own personal um, struggles. So Ubuntu really calls us to ask ourselves, how are we uh, responding to what's happening, understanding that what the people of Congo and the people of Gaza are experiencing are also impacting you. And I think it's been said that none of them are safe until we all are. So that's really what Ubuntu is about. It's not about the people that you're related to by blood, but it's all human beings. I have um, the window of tolerance here, but I'm not going to spend so much time in it. But every time we are in spaces where we are talking about feelings and how people are impacted and the trauma that they carry, we need to be teaching about the basics of nervous systems and how we experience being in our window of tolerance and what happens um, when our window of tolerance shrinks because of the stress and the trauma that we experience. And we see the hyperarousal there being the flight and fight. That's the language that many might be familiar with. And the hypoarousal there at the bottom being the freeze part where our bodies are numb and frozen and what have you. So when we're working with the youth, we want to make sure that we're helping them understand all of that, so that you're not just working with a shell, but you are able to meet and be and hold space for whatever is showing up during your time with the people you're working with. They say it takes a village to raise a child. That's really what Ubuntu is about. And that village being every human being that is in that village or in that community, and what happens when the village is not safe. So if it takes a village to raise a child, it also takes a village to harm the children, which means when we have youth that are struggling, it's part of the village that's failing versus the youth being problematic. And we know that when the village hums, we have things like racial profiling, adultification of racially minoritized youth. We have over surveillance from the police and from the systems that they are in, and silencing of the youth voices. So I hope that if you're embracing Ubuntu, you do not become part of the village that's harming the youth that you're working with. And what happens when the village burns? The youth disengage and the grief becomes resistance, and sometimes the rage and pain becomes internalized. And what we see as attention seeking is often really connection seeking. They're seeking villages of safety that are not there for them. And there's a proverb that says, if a child is not embraced by the village, sometimes they'll have to burn it down to feel its warmth. And we know right now that in Durham region, there's a lot of Black youth that are disappearing. And I know that it's the media is not really prioritizing that, but that's really an example of a burning village where we have the youth disappearing, we have the youth not participating at the best of their potential, but struggling in different areas, whether they're using drugs or they're houseless and all of that. So that's what happens when we live in ways that lack Ubuntu. And Ubuntu teaches us that healing is not an individual journey, it's just woven into our relationships. I've already talked about the interconnectedness, and that includes that contributes to our collective well-being. And when one person in a community is struggling, we all feel the impact. And those that work with youth, you may be familiar with adverse childhood experiences. And these are the 10 areas that they ask: the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, physical neglect, mental illness. And what happens is they ask 10 questions. And with each question that you say yes, you get a point. This is about what happened to you before you turned 18 years old. I often get criticized when I mention this because the research has evolved, but I think it doesn't hurt to mention that when the research started, it was 17,000 white people that were interviewed. And not only just 17,000 white people, but it was people of middle class and also college educated. So we call it evidence-based, but the evidence was very selective and it was very exclusive. It included one group of people. Yes, I know I said earlier on that every time there is a people, they may look alike, but there are differences. But in this particular case, it was 17,000 people. So the research has since been extended to other groups, but when it started, it was just that. And so when you're asking these questions about what happened to people before they turned 18, it really focuses on individual problems, individual trauma, and locating problems within people. And those questions really barely look into narratives that are collective. So ACEs ask, what happened to you before age 18? We are trying to assess the early childhood trauma, and it's often a predictor of your mental health later on as an adult. And Resmaa Menakem, he's the one who coined the HEAP theory, and we'll talk about HEAP in a few minutes. But the HEAP theory stands for historical, intergenerational, persistent, institutional, and personal traumas. And so when you notice, we go from what happened to you before you turned 18 to what happened to your people and how is it impacting you now, because we are now looking at the historical, intergenerational, and the institutional aspects of trauma versus just locating problems within the individual. And then Ubuntu asks, who are you in relation to others and how can we heal together? So there's that interdependence, dignity, and collective well-being and shared humanity. That's why sometimes I criticize allyship, because when we call what you call allyship is what we call Ubuntu, which is really being a decent human being who worries about the well-being of others. So you don't really need a cookie for taking care of one another. It's really in a collective society, it's really an expectation that you worry about your neighbor, you worry about the kid next door, and you do not really need any legal anything to take care of them. And Lila Watson, an Indigenous activist, says, if you've come to help me, then you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. And that's exactly what Desmond Tutu said in that video that we watched together. So when you see yourself not as a helper, but being a human being who's co-creating cultural experiences one with another being, the meaning shifts when you think you're helping, because in a helping role there's already a hierarchy where you are the helper and there's the person who we call at-risk youth. What does that even mean, right? When we reduce youth to being at risk, why are they at risk to begin with? It's because of living in villages that are harmful. So we need to be shifting all of that to seeing ourselves as regular human beings that are taking care of one another. And this is the heap theory. Where you're looking at, if you go back to what I shared about cultural competency, Dr. Terry Cross mentions the cultural destruction. That's where the historical piece comes in here, the destruction of people's identities and knowledge systems and languages and all of that. And then how the trauma is passed down from one generation to the other. And the persistent institutional, if you remember again, on on the cultural competency piece, I shared about the institutional assimilation, which was under the cultural blindness piece. So it's all connected. And finally, the personal traumas, because I think even as you navigate life as an individual, there may be some traumas that you experience as an individual, whether from childhood or other experiences. Some people experience workplace trauma, some it's sexual trauma. It could be just any other trauma, but really looking at a person in front of you holistically versus just looking at what happened to you before you turned 18. So when I was invited to keynote on Ubuntu in March, I felt compelled to take it beyond I am because you are, because in many cases when I heard that, when people talked about Ubuntu, it seemed like that's all that they knew. I am because you are, but there was no meat behind that. It just didn't give the vibe that people understood what Ubuntu was in the context that I did as somebody who was raised in the village by my grandparents and lived in a collective way. And before I break this down, I want to share that my earliest memories of Ubuntu was when I was 4 years old. I started grade 1 when I was 4, because my grandmother says that I complained that I'm so tired of ama janguten asem zileni. That's how we counted in our language. She says I was so tired of that. So she got tired of me complaining, and because she was a teacher, she took me to school when I was 4 years old. But because we lived in a village, we didn't have any cars or Ubers. We had to walk to school a very long distance. So what happened was the grade 7 students and the grade 6 students used to take turns in carrying me on their neck. They would take turns until we get to school. And if you use your colonial gaze to look at that, you would say those kids are parentified, but they were just practicing Ubuntu because they were taught that we take care of each other and we do not leave anyone behind. And as I grew older, obviously I got used to the walking and I started walking on my own, but that was the early seeds of Ubuntu that I remember that I continue to carry forward, where we take care of each other. So the H.A.R.M.O.N.Y framework, H stands for honoring our ancestors and elders. So when you're working with the people that you're working with, some of the work that you could do is really doing some roots work. For those that attended Tree of Life, the Tree of Life workshop in a couple of weeks ago, that's where this piece comes in, where you are exploring people's roots and inviting them to do some storytelling and songs and inquiring about their connection with their grandparents and what have you. I understand that this is not information that's accessible to everyone due to disconnection from people's ancestral roots and everything, but it doesn't really stop us from exploring and from learning and remembering that our bodies remember what the mind doesn't. And A stands for ancestral and natural healing. So we're encouraging we're encouraging nature and land-based activities and such as gardening and forest walks and planting trees. Drumming, where I come from, actually drumming used to be associated with evil spirits because that is the colonial knowledge that we were taught. So when you see people drumming, you think, oh, they're doing traditional activities, but that's really how our ancestors communicated. So drums have a different role. Sometimes it was just for communicating that there's a gathering. Sometimes it was for communicating different things. And R stands for relational accountability. So when we started this workshop, I talked about agreements and invited you to add what you needed to do, what you needed to keep yourself safe. So this is how you can, when you're studying group work with youth, you can help them, you can invite them to participate in co-creating those agreements and model reciprocal peer mentorships and make sure you're teaching restorative rather than punitive practices. So you are modeling that for them to be in relationship with each other where there's accountability. The mind, body, spirit integration, we've already touched on that when we looked at the window of tolerance and the three storytellers of the mind, heart, and body. So in your work with youth, making sure that there are some somatic practices where you're teaching emotional literacy and you're allowing them to feel things and increasing their toolbox somehow. We started this, we had an activity where you had to identify how you take care of yourself. So that's where that comes in. O is for openness to learning and unlearning. I think that all of us are learning as we grow. So when you are with youth, if you need that humility to position yourself as a learner, knowing that no matter what's happening to them, they are still the experts of their own stories, and you're open to learning and unlearning and relearning from them. And N is for nurturing communal solidarity. So emphasizing the language that we take care of each other here. We create villages of care. And if you can include affirmations and share some vulnerability and share cultural rituals and the Kwanzaa principles are great. I'm going to put it on record that I'm aware of Karenga's apologies, Karenga's history, Karenga's history of he's been accused of many things, and I think in as much as that is the case, it still doesn't demean the cultural teachings in Kwanzaa because he doesn't own the traditions. He found them there and they will outlive them. We give him credit for putting it together. And yielding to Ubuntu, that is the practice piece. How, after learning all of that, how do you then change how you work to meet the cultural context of the people that you're working with from a communal lenses? How are we connected? How do your choices impact others? So when we start to ask those questions, and the youth that we're working with can start to realize that even when they make individual choices, they think the choices are for them, it always impacts the people around them. And we model non-hierarchical approaches. and listening to them as co-creators and co-teachers, not subjects to be studied, because most of the times that's how we come in as professionals and as experts, and we infantilize the youth that we work with. And so we want to make sure we are uplifting group identity and interdependence over competition. And I end that with the proverbs of we in Ndebele we say izandla ziyagezana. That means hands wash each other. So the other hand need the other hand, and so forth. And we rise by lifting others. And you can say I am because we are, and I think it holds more power than I am because you are, so that it's beyond me and you to include the collective. And you had Desmond Tutu talk about a person is a person because of other person. It comes from the Zulu proverb, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. That's where that comes from. And I think that we I touched on this pretty quickly, but Katie will send part of the slides that have the H.A.R.M.O.N.Y framework. It's still really at the infancy stages, but it gave me an opportunity to look beyond I am because you are, so that we can include all the other parts of our interconnectedness as humans and more than humans. And I think that captures the meat of this workshop in terms of Ubuntu and how we integrate it to other practices. And in this case, I only focused on cultural competency and the heap theory. And I talk about self-care here because we need to take care of ourselves. But I think that if we practice Ubuntu, then where there is community care, self-care is already embedded in there. When people are taken care of communally, the self-care piece really weaves in organically. Most of the times people think that self-care means doing everything together, but we are really wired for connection. So when you're connected to your villages of care, you're not going to see yourself as lazy when you're resting. You listen to your body, which is why we talked about the window of tolerance, so that you know when you're being pushed out of your window of tolerance and you can take care of yourself. So we know that rest is not privilege. It's a human right. And if you're not familiar with Tricia Hassey's Rest is a Resistance, I encourage you to look that up. She has some great resources. I even have some flashcards here. And true self-care is about creating balance, not isolation. And it's really okay to rely on others. It's not a weakness. In the Western society, we often think asking for help is weakness. I forgot to buy onions one Christmas, so I called it a Christmas without onions. And where I come from, I would have easily knocked on my neighbors and say, "Hey, do you have extra onions?" But my husband was like, "Well, this is a small town. You want everybody to think that we can't afford onions." And I was just floored because I just thought it was something minor that I can go to my neighbors, and where again in the village, if you run out of something before you go to the store was far, by the way, you could easily, we just had that mutual aid and exchange of things that you can just go and say, "Oh, I'm out of cooking oil. Oh, here, you give it back when you get it," and things like that, and you exchange. So that's really in an Ubuntu centered way of being. We take care of each other, and it extends to all parts of our well-being. So I pose the question, how does shifting from individual self-care to Ubuntu-centered care change your perspective on your well-being?